Name is Curtis Valentine. I'm the co-director of the Reinventing America Schools project here at the Progressive Policy Institute. Today's session, today's webinar, HBCUs, the key to the future of K-12 education, is I'm going to claim it in advance my favorite webinar so far. Important because it really brings all the things that I care about so much into the same place. It talks about HBCUs, it talks about the history of education, talks about the future of education, but also talks about how we give parents choices and where they send their students. The Progressive Policy Institute is a think tank, a nonprofit think tank here in Washington, D.C. And our project promotes what we call 21st century schools, are schools that give parents more choices, give school leaders more autonomy, and return for more accountability. Today's webinar is actually in partnership with the 74, and we are live on the 74's Facebook page. If you don't know about the 74, please log in, check them out, and follow their work. They're one of the top education journalism outlets, and for you to stay informed on education in every state in the country. Today, you will hear from elected officials, educators, and advocates as they discuss the role and impact of historically Black colleges and universities, and how HBCUs can have an impact on growing the demand of Black parents for innovation and choice in K-12 education. Before we get started, before I have my panelists introduce themselves, we want to hear from you, the audience. We can't see you, but we want to know who's in the audience. And so here's our first poll question. Which group do you most identify with? Now, if you're like me, there are a couple that I identify with. I'm a parent, I'm a policymaker. And so what one in particular with this conversation do you most identify with? We're going to have you follow that and fill that out. At the same time, we're going to have our panelists introduce themselves. We're going to come back and show them who's in the audience so they can get a feel for, are they majority parents? Are they majority funders? Are they majority journalists, majority students? But that being said, I want to jump out and allow my panelists to introduce themselves, where they're at, and what they do. And so first and foremost, I will ask my sister, Dr. Nina Gilbert, introduce herself, what she does, where she's at, and we'll throw it to the rest of our panel. Dr. Gilbert.
Greetings. Thank you so much, Brother Valentine, for inviting me to participate. And also greetings to my fellow panelists. I'm Nina Gilbert. I am the Executive Director for the Morehouse Center for Excellence in Education, where I also serve as the Chair of the Education Department. And our work here is around preparing the Black male educator lifeline. We are working tirelessly to produce revolutionary educators who can go out and transform the education sector. I'm glad to be with you all today.
Thank you for having me. And I love that term revolutionary. You'll hear me say that a lot. We're going to stay in the state of Georgia and have Representative El Mahdi Holly introduce himself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you definitely, Curtis, and good to see my esteemed panelists here. My name is El Mahdi Holly. I am a fifth year, third term member of the Georgia State General Assembly, representing House District 116, located in the semi-urban areas of Henry County and Clayton County, as well as an avid activist for the right reasons, and fortunately been able to really help with continuing to engage our local historically Black colleges in the area, including my alma mater, Morehouse College, and also the co-founder the founder and co-chair of the Georgia Africa Legislative Caucus. But I'm glad to be here and I'm ready for this conversation.
Thank you so much, Representative Holly, for joining us. Let's head west, but we're going to stop off in Tennessee with Brother Jesse Chisholm. Please introduce yourself, sir.
Hey, everybody. Thank you all for having me. It's an honor to be on this panel with you all. I'm State Representative Jesse Chisholm, for fifth year out of the 85th House District in Memphis, Tennessee. I have the state line from Tennessee to Mississippi. I have that corridor for about 50 miles. I am the vice chair of the Tennessee Black Caucus of State Legislators, and I have a focus on Black farmers. So it's just an honor to be here, to be on here with you all, and I'm here to learn. I'm here to do everything.
Thank you so much, and thank you for joining us today. Last but not least, my good brother, Dr. Kariga Roush, please introduce yourself.
Definitely appreciate that and really honored to be with you, Curtis, and a huge thank you to PPI and the 74 for organizing and promoting this really important event and conversation. As you indicated, my name is Kariga Roush, and I serve students and families as the president and CEO of the National Association of Charter School Authorizers, or NACSA. NACSA is the only national organization with the sole purpose of improving authorizing of all types across the country so that more kids, especially kids who look like us and lower income students, access an excellent public school that's really customized their unique aspirations. And I'm really honored to be a part of this conversation today. Looking forward to diving in.
No, thank you so much. We have an all-star panel on an amazing topic. Let me say this. According to the United Negro College Fund, while HBCUs make up only 3% of the country's colleges and universities, they enrolled 10% of all African-American students and produced almost 20% of all the African-American graduates. More specifically, HBCUs produce 50% of America's Black teachers, 85% of America's Black doctors, 80% of America's Black federal judges, 75% of America's Black veterinarians, and 75% of America's Black military officers. That being said, I do want to give you all a chance to just talk about what have HBCUs meant to you and how they've impacted your life. And I'll let anybody jump right in there.
I guess I'll take the first bite of the apple. Again, Jesse Chisholm, State Representative of Tennessee. HBCUs have been such a driving force for Black excellence. I got a chance to have the privilege of being a graduate of Morehouse College. And, being at an HBCU, it gives many of us a period of time where we are not a minority. So that instills a certain amount of confidence. It lets us know that we're Black, that we're loved, that we're excellent, that we are something that we should be proud of. And being from an HBCU has instilled that pride in me amongst a lot of other people. And I think that's one of the driving forces that helps so much Black excellence. Like to your point, we have so many educators, so many policymakers, so many great people doing so many great things that came from HBCUs. And that HBCU is an important thing in our Black community.
Yeah, I'm happy to build on that because I also come in this conversation as a proud father of two Black girls, one who's a high school senior that's going through all of the college application processes now and is actively considering a number of HBCUs for her next step. And the data that you just provided, Curtis, is precisely why those of us that are working to transform K-12 education really need HBCU partners right now. Because if there's any institution that's demonstrated over a long period of time what's possible for kids who look like us, it's HBCUs. And that expertise is needed desperately right now in K-12 education. I would have the audience really look at a couple of reports that have come out of the last few years that really help to amplify that point. And if you haven't kind of taken a look at one is a report by UNCF that's called Imparting Wisdom. I'm sure if you go on UNCF's website, you can kind of access it. But what it really does is identifies the HBCU practices that have really elevated Black achievement and wellness and how those practices can be used to transform K-12 for better outcomes. A second report that was done by Energy Converters and the Charter School Growth Fund was called Ebony Towers. And it really illustrates how some HBCU graduates are leading charter schools, which we'll talk about a little bit later, but autonomous schools and how their HBCU experiences have really shaped how they're running their schools, for kids, and why that autonomy is really important for them to run the schools as they see fit and why it's so important.
Thank you, Dr. Rauscher. We're looking forward to hearing from the decision day where your daughter decides to go to school, and I know HBCUs are rooting for her. Anyone else want to talk about how HBCUs have impacted your life?
Sure, I'll chime in. So I am a proud graduate of an HBCU for my graduate program, Clark Atlanta University, and of course I lead the work here as I prepare educators here at Morehouse College. But we often hear about the low percentage of Black male teachers in the public school sector. The number was around 2%, and now that number has decreased. And we know that narrative around Black male achievement and the scarcity of Black male K-12 teachers, that's incompatible with the Morehouse mandate to develop men with disciplined minds to lead lives of leadership and service. So we are confident here at Morehouse College that our approach to preparing educators and to make sure that we are working to equip all of our graduates with the tools they need to, again, use this term, revolutionize. We were trying to revolutionize the education sector. And we are the nation's only all-male institution solely dedicated to the education of Black men. And we know that we're uniquely suited to answer the call to prepare these Black men to serve in schools and districts, to become public officials, elected officials, and serve in communities across this country. So yes, we are not, and this is not new. We've been doing this work, not just here at Morehouse College, but Black people have been doing the work to educate our own since, forever. This is not a new endeavor for us.
President Holly, you mentioned earlier
Absolutely.
you're an HBCU alum. How they impacted your life?
Yeah, absolutely. I believe, and especially from my perspective of entering a historically Black college and university after having graduated schools in predominantly white communities throughout Metro Atlanta, from Buckhead to Sandy Springs, where I often was not around members of my community. I really sought to have a very strong undergirding that reflected my ancestors' triumphs, because I knew that this world is fairly challenging for members of my community, and certainly for those who are working class Americans who are having to face really tough consequences because they weren't born with a silver spoon in their mouth. I knew that if I went to a historically Black college, and I did have several on my list. I was looking at Grambling. I was looking at Tuskegee. Unfortunately, when I was accepted at Morehouse College, what I was able to gain in those 4 years was not only just a full understanding of who I was, but also a greater understanding about how our community has had to struggle. So that when, I, just like my colleague, Representative Chisholm, when we would enter into the halls of power later in life, we can understand how we were perceived, but even more so because we built up a structured idea of who we are. We realized that there's nobody who can define us. We understood who we are. We were able to fully master the knowledge of our own selves, as well as for what our community requires. And I think that's that dedication that is really inherent in the educational platform of historically Black colleges and universities, because it's not just that we're educating students so that they can succeed tomorrow, but we're the institutions we almost have a mandate among all of our fellow alum that we have to contribute towards society in a way that will help to uplift our people. And I think that is what is central to our experience.
Thank you. Thank you all. I mean, this is all very personal, clearly, to all of you all, but many people who are on the line have been impacted by HBCUs, whether you attended, whether you have HBCU alum teach your children, work with you, or you've hired an HBCU alum, and the impact they have on our society. I want to put this conversation in our context. And we're in a new world. Everyone knows that. We're in this post-George Floyd, post-affirmative action, post-COVID world. And in this post-COVID world, Black students are struggling academically and socio-emotionally, but academically reflected in recent data on the National Assessment on Educational Progress, which is the NAEP exam, or we call the nation's report card. At the same time, Black parents continue to look for answers, and many have turned to public charter schools as the answer. In 2023, there were 99 HBCUs located in 19 states and the District of Columbia. And the majority of them are actually in the South, representatives. At the same time, according to the U.S. Department of Education, more than half, this actually surprised me, more than half of all Black K-12 students are also in the South. So you have HBCUs, you have more than half of all Black students in America are in the South. And so you have this sort of nexus, creating an opportunity for HBCUs to impact the growing number of Black students and Black families who are looking for these very same options, right? So you have need, you have location, you have proximity, and you also have history, which we all know the HBCUs have. And so, Dr. Rouse, I want to come to you first. For those who don't know, and for those who sort of get lost in sort of terminology, what is a public charter school? How is one created? And more importantly, how is it held accountable for doing what it says it was going to do when it got the power to do so?
Yeah, really appreciate the question, because there's a lot of noise and misperceptions about charter schools. Let me say first that charter schools are free public schools that are open to any student that wants to attend. Charter school leaders and board members are educating kids in charter schools. They do have the ability to design and operate schools with a little bit more flexibility than other kinds of public schools. But in exchange for that flexibility, they have to meet high academic, financial, and operational outcome expectations. And they're held accountable for those expectations by, one, families who choose whether or not that school is the right fit for the aspirations of their kid. And they're held accountable by these entities called charter school authorizers, who enforce the performance contract that details performance expectations that the authorizer has and the school has. And so at their best, charter schools and authorizers really unlock some really incredible and excellent individualized opportunities for students and communities. We should also be honest that when done badly, and there are some bad charter schools that are out there, they contribute to educational failure, and that's unacceptable. They are, however, a powerful solution, among many others, for how to create a thriving public school system with lots of different kinds of schools and models and ways of organizing learning. And a mix of different kinds of public schools helps all schools get better because they're able to find schools that can meet unique aspirations and needs. And contrary to some of the noise out there about charters, they do tend to have a significantly higher proportion of Black principals and teachers. And they also tend to have stronger outcomes, especially for students of color in many, but certainly not all places. And I'm also glad that you asked about how charter schools are created, because that's an important one. They don't just kind of pop up in communities. So most charter schools are created by groups of educators and citizens. They come together to identify an educational need and an approach to how they're going to engage in it. They develop and refine that idea, and they spend a lot of time listening to families and communities before then putting that idea on paper for consideration by the authorizer. And a new school can't be started, nor can it continue without the approval of that authorizer. And so really important that we think about the incredible opportunities that charter schools, and you'll hear me say charter schools, Curtis, because I believe the term public charter schools is redundant, because charter schools are public schools that are free and open to all. But it's really important that they are done well, and that really do unlock the opportunities and powers that God has already given kids and families to amplify, and that we always keep quality as our North Bar in this work.
Jack, I want to follow up. You mentioned a term that I'm not sure everyone has heard. You mentioned the term authorizer. Now, full confession, a good number, and some would say even the majority of authorizers are actually traditional public school boards. I spent 10 years on my school board in Prince George's County and was an authorizer of 12 charter schools while I was on my school board. There are other types of authorizers. Give me an example of different entities that can be. Can a university be an authorizer? Can a nonprofit be an authorizer? Can a state board be an authorizer? Just for those who are trying to figure out, I heard the term, but explain to me what that means, sir.
Absolutely appreciate the follow up. Right, so authorizers are institutions of various types, right? So you have school districts that are authorizers. You have some higher education institutions relevant to this conversation, that are authorizers. You have some state boards of education that are authorizers. You have some municipalities that are authorizers. And some others, right, that exist. The mix of who is allowed to authorize is determined by state policy. And so it's going to be different in different states. Massachusetts, for example, has a single authorizer, and that is their State Department of Education, and then their commissioners that ultimately make the determination, right? That's very different than a place like California, where they are pretty dominated by just school districts that are able to authorize. But at its core, authorizers are the entity empowered by state law that say who is able to start or not start a charter school, to oversee their performance, with the school setting expectations for academics and finances and operations. And then usually after a 5-year period of time, having a merit-based examination of if that school lived up to their promises or not, and then making a determination if they should continue to have the privilege of serving kids and or families.
Thank you very much. Another full confession, I've opened charter schools and I've closed them as a member of the Board of Education in my district. And so we've had that experience. I do want to come to you, Dr. Gilbert, but before we do that, I do want to see the results of our poll. Who's out there? Who are we talking to? As you can see, 27% of the people who are listening in or responding to this poll are school leaders. The second largest group is going to be either funders or policymakers, people like yourself and people who are trying to invest in this. And then we also have those who are others. I will also say, just for looking at the poll, not everybody can respond to the poll. So if you're watching on the 74, you're watching on Twitter, you couldn't. But if you were logged in, you'd be able to respond. So as you're responding, you can see who's listening in. Dr. Gilbert, you did not mention this in your intro, but you are a former charter school leader. At Morehouse, you also have students who are learning how to open up their own schools. Can you explain your understanding of public charter schools and what exactly is Morehouse College doing in the area of training young people to become school founders?
So let me start with like my exposure and introduction to charters. I was one of those people who did not know anything about charter schools prior to opening the state of Georgia's first single gender charter school back in 2008. After serving as a traditional public school educator for over 10 years, I decided to open a school after seeing the disproportionality that existed in my district as it related to the number of students that were suffering from a suspension, expulsion, and separation, involuntary separation from school. Those students were primarily Black and Brown students and students with special needs. As a mother of 3 children, I had my own concerns about the type of education my children would receive in our highly resourced school district. My husband and I mortgaged our way into what we thought was a great school district. We mortgaged our way into even what we thought was a great neighborhood so we can get into the best school. And that was still not enough for our children to have access to advanced placement classes and honors classes that they were entitled to, right? So for me, it was about like looking for options and solutions for the students in my district and my own children. And I literally had to Google, once I started to think about what options exist outside of my school, maybe I should start my own. And so I had to figure out, how do I start a school? And I just kind of stumbled upon the charter school world. So yes, I opened a school in 2008, but it was not without its struggle. It was not without a lot of sacrifice. But I'm glad you showed the poll, because the folks that made this possible were parents other parents who felt just like I felt, that we needed an option. Also, I saw in the poll the number of school leaders who were attending this webinar, and those were the folks who actually said, hey, I am interested in learning how I can serve in a space that is different from the traditional public school where I currently work. And these folks had to have an entrepreneurial mindset. And then I saw that you had a number of funders and legislators or policymakers. Those were the folks who also had a big role to play, because, starting a school that is a little kind of unorthodox as it relates to how it's governed and how it's funded can't survive. And I think that's an important caveat. I know we mentioned about, charter schools are excellent opportunities for students, regardless of their zip code. If we want a high-performing school, they have to be done well. But doing them well also requires that they have adequate resources, right? And you can't do that unless you have a funding formula or adequate funding to make sure that those students who are in that charter school have access to the same high-level curriculum and resources and facilities and instructional staff as students in their neighboring schools. And in order to make sure that happens, you have to have the will of policymakers, elected officials, legislators, school boards to make sure that the school has everything it needs. So it's pretty complex. When you're talking about just, the neighborhood mom, teacher, and I'm not talking about these schools that are started by large networks that have been in existence for a while. I'm talking about grassroots schools started by community members. It requires kind of this mosaic of folks who are going to advocate for the school. They're committed to funding the school. They're committed to governing the school well, and that requires a great deal of preparation, some study and scholarship and understanding, some, sacrifice and hard work. And that's why here at Morehouse, we are intentional about preparing students who feel like, they have this entrepreneurial kind of social justice focus on impacting the education space. And so we have a course, school leadership and design. And so students are actually learning how to construct a solid application or proposal, but they also have to do research around, governance models and making sure that the governing board is well equipped to lead the school, making sure that it has a curriculum and a strong instructional program, understanding human resources and business and finance, because a school is more than just the curriculum, right? You also have to be able to keep that thing open, right? And so that requires business acumen, understanding finance, funding formulas, and just law. Like, how can you make sure that you remain compliant with all of the policies and the laws that every other public school is required to abide by? And then understanding the accountability piece around the authorizing and authorizers' expectations for that school. And I'll pause there because there's so many layers and levels to this, but I do think it's important for folks to understand what's a myth and what's true about what charter schools are. And I think there's just a lot of, I think the term I've heard earlier today, noise, a lot of noise and misconception, and a lot of division around, what the role of a charter school should be, what it is and what it is not. So hopefully we can do good work to clarify, the benefits and even the areas where charter schools can improve, much like any other school model needs to improve.
Thank you so much. Incredibly important and great point. I hope people are taking notes. You're getting a lot of jewels here. I do want to come to my representatives, folks in power who have the power to impact a lot of the work that we're trying to do. But before we do that, I want to go back out to the audience and our listeners, our viewers. And here's our poll question. During the pandemic, did you or someone seek out school options outside of the local traditional public school that you were zoned for? And so during the pandemic and since, has someone or did you seek out a school outside of the traditional public school system? That could have been a public charter school. It could have been a homeschool model. It could have been a micro school. Did you look outside of your system for a new school? That being said, And I want to come to you, brother, because you all are very, you all sort of are similar to a lot of state representatives where HBCUs are located. So, where states where HBCUs are located are, many of them are led by Republicans, but cities and local governments and their representatives are Democrats, right? And so, like these sort of blue representatives in red states, and Democratic lawmakers have been bipartisan, and particularly on education, you have to be bipartisan to really be successful in these places, like Georgia, like Tennessee, where you two have been elected and serve. And for many lawmakers, school options and school choice has been an opportunity for both parties to work together. And so my question for both of you is more fundamental. What are some of the constituent concerns about public education that you're hearing coming out of COVID? So just in general, what are you hearing from your constituents about their concerns about education, public education coming out of COVID?
Rep Chisholm, you got it.
You go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay. Well, first, I just wanted to say thank you for really taking the time to really spell out what are the positives of the public charter school education. And I think that definitely, especially for those of us who are, graduates of privately funded, historically Black colleges, we understand kind of at the macrocosm level what a lot of our locals are understanding and the who are having a balance whether or not to really look at the benefits of a public education versus a private one. Let me just first start before I answer the question about COVID. I wanted to kind of give some background information for the sake of just understanding where Georgia sits. When it comes to public education in Georgia, the $32 billion that we see in our budget, about a third of that money goes towards public education. And so even though we find that really having a charter school implemented is in contrast to the more traditional public model that we've seen, and we realize that there's going to be parts of our state that will likely not see a charter school of any type. Those are in the rural areas. The vast majority of the population now lives in the urban area, but there's roughly there's a good amount who live all around the state, and so there's going to be a desire certainly to see that education dollars are used effectively, so that teachers can get paid, so that we can make sure that not just books but also the items, technological items that will help our children to maximize their brain space will be made available equitably across Georgia. But we've seen a lot of tension inside of our legislature, where you would think that, Democrats and Republicans would maybe be against each other on the issue of, do you fund urban schools? Do you fund rural schools? But because public education requires spending all across Georgia, then what we've seen is a debate to come up that should money be siphoned away from public education that is going to traditional schools, and should that money go to private charter schools public charter schools, where the possibility exists that for areas outside of urban metropolitan Atlanta will never see the building of a public charter school. So that is, we had legislation that came up this time around to siphon that money away, and it was actually defeated not only by Democrats but also by a lot of Republicans, white Republicans, who lived in rural parts of our state that really never they looked to say, there's not going to be a charter school opened up in our area, and so it's a tough way to kind of look at it. But I really felt the need to be able to just kind of give some background on it. But with respect to the question about how we're rebounding since COVID, we saw, and I'm sure that there's a lot of parents on this line, saw that for their students having to be in front of a teacher to really get instruction, the challenges is that we dealt with one of the most dangerous times of our lifetime, where we were just dying based upon our inability to tackle this virus. And we also saw that many students really enjoyed the personal contact between them and their teachers. And when that was not made available, even though classes were able to, many school systems were able to go online and be able to teach, but that it's really hard to replace human connectivity with screen time without following up with some type of hybrid model, which really allows for that connection. And so two things we saw where it hit us hard is that students who really value that in-person contact, their grades are slipping, their test scores they're not able to advance themselves and are having to make up courses, and it set them back. The other side too, and I think this is really focused on the types of career opportunities that are available once we graduate from colleges, HBCUs included, is that a lot of the technology that is required on some of the higher paying jobs that are more available now, they're requiring more of our students than what many traditional schools have allowed. And so it's one of those things where we're seeing that not just the job market is adjusting, but there's been a lot of pressure put on parents to find some way to be able to achieve the same level of high outcomes that were already expected of children, who unfortunately have had to really adjust, being that their education was really kind of robbed from them because in-person contact was not made available during the pandemic. But hopefully that explains it.
Representative Chisholm, what are you hearing from folks in Tennessee?
In Tennessee, since COVID, we've had so many students that have suffered not only that year, who suffered from learning loss, not only from the year that we were out for COVID, but those years coming back into the school systems. So many students, because of the screen, that in-person contact is so important that a lot of times we had students that did not go back to school at all after the COVID pandemic started to alleviate itself a bit. So let me go to the charter school aspect of it. Back in 2021, I believe, we actually passed a charter school authorizer that went statewide, so that we can have more diversity in education options. Now, one of the things that we had to fight was, little misconceptions. A lot of people thought that charter schools were the private schools that were taking money from our public schools. So, there was a big fight here in Tennessee about the vouchers, and we had to differentiate our charter schools from those voucher programs, because charter schools are public schools. So we had to let people know that our charter schools, they were in fact public schools. And since that time, things are getting better here, and it's just it's something that we continue to educate people about.
Thank you so much. And I just want to point something out. And this happens too often, and I know Dr. Roush and Dr. Gilbert can speak to this. There's often a conflation between public charter schools and vouchers. It happens. We need to correct it. I'm glad you're corrected in Tennessee, particularly with you, Representative Holly. There was a comment in the chat that mentioned, I think the bill you were referencing about access in the rural areas was actually a voucher bill. And so again, this idea of how we want to clarify that within this particular model, and what we're talking about is HBCUs, would be publicly funded, and accountability at the end is really to the public as well. Before we go into the next conversation, I want to talk about what this would look like moving forward, how HBCUs can address the issues that we're talking about, and also ensure that parents have more options. But we want to know also, during the pandemic, how many folks actually had to look for other options or knew someone who had to look for another option. And so 75% of the people who are on this call either themselves or knew someone, either during the pandemic temporarily or moving forward, look for an option outside of what they already had. Those who did not maybe didn't have that option. And so that's something that I think even Dr. Gilbert mentioned, some of us who can move and have the funding to do so as a privilege. But unfortunately, a lot of our constituents and supporters cannot do that. But I do want to come back to you, Dr. Gilbert, Dr. Roush, as it relates to sort of how we get to this point. And this idea of opening schools is not new to HBCUs. The terminology may be different, but we just call them something differently. And I'm firmly of the mindset that I'm perfectly fine calling them, HBCU lab schools as opposed to charter schools, because everything that comes with the terminology. That's what they were called a generation ago. And so HBCUs have been in the business of creating, K-12 schools going back to even the founding of these schools. HBCUs were in many cases, secondary schools that were actually graduated into post-secondary schools. You had the Southern University Lab Center, and that was really about teacher preparation. You had the FAMU, Florida A&M Development School, and that was for research. You also had Rosenwald schools, which I'm personally connected to, and those were pipelines into HBCU. So we were doing this generations ago. HBCUs were doing this around teaching, research, and pipelines. And there's a certain disconnect from the historical, and in many cases, a lost opportunity. So Dr. Gilbert, let me ask you this question. So if you think about the role HBCUs can play in K-12, we want to transition to this conversation about what the future looks like. What is your grand vision for how HBCUs, like Morehouse and others, can impact teacher preparation, research, and student pipelines as authorizers of HBCU, we'll call them lab schools?
Sure. And I won't say, how HBCUs can impact. I would prefer to say how HBCUs have impacted, right? But we look at the kind of more popular narrative, the macro narrative around, school options, are typically it's synonymous with charters. But lab schools founded by HBCUs, it's not a new thing. You mentioned Southern, and there's Howard, but you also have Alabama State. Alabama State started a lab school during the Jim Crow era, and it's been overlooked by historians. It's been overlooked by policymakers. It's been overlooked by the ed reform sector. We don't talk about that work that has been done in HBCUs and communities of color for generations. For quite a long time, HBCUs have been the place where the Black teacher, I don't even want to use the term pipeline, but the exceptionalism that we see in the Black educator workforce has come out of HBCUs. And the whole laboratory school model evolved from these schools that were core teacher training institutes in HBCUs back in the early 1920s. And you had research being done there. You had all of these high-level exceptional educational experiences provided to pre-service teachers who then in turn educated students at the K-12 level. So we think about this more frequently when you think about the school, Chicago Lab School at University of Chicago and the work of John Dewey, but we overlook the work that HBCUs have been doing, for close to a century in this space. So yes, we are working right now at Morehouse with a lab school. We have a school two faculty members, myself and Dr. Artesius Miller. We are both founders of charter schools. He currently continues to lead his school while serving as an adjunct faculty here. And he's now, I want to say, the chair of the board for the Georgia Technical Colleges Georgia System of Technological Colleges. But we, are looking at all of the best practices, promising practices, new approaches in education that can be further explored through our lab school model, but also looking to see how we, as an HBCU, Morehouse College specifically, takes a more prominent role in the education of our children, Black and Brown children, who are right now, I feel like, held in this as intellectual hostages, because teachers are prohibited from teaching curriculum in a way that's honest and truthful. That also is incompatible with who we are as Morehouse College. So here we focus on preparing our students to teach and lead in an authentic, honest, and accurate way, and not to revise history or allow others to revise our history. We talk about the flexibility that exists in charter schools. I would say between charters, labs, independent, private, homeschools, we have to find other approaches to educate our children, to make sure that our children are not left to only receive the education that is mandated to them, because people want to make sure that politics either don't get in the way, when actually politics sometimes get all the way in the way of what should really be happening in the K-12 space. And you should let people decide whether they want their children educated in the model or in the school that best serves them. So I'm excited about the possibilities and the work we're doing here to make sure that we expose our students, who are aspiring teachers, leaders, founders, entrepreneurs, to all of the ways in which they can transform education.
Dr. Rausch, so NACSA, your association, what role would it play in allowing HBCUs like Morehouse and others? You got Fisk and Tennessee State, and in Tennessee, you got other HBCUs in the state of Georgia and in the South, to bring forth this vision of how they get involved in K-12 the way they had in the past, around research, around pipelines, around teacher preparation, and this idea of authorizing HBCU lab schools of the future. What role does NACSA play? But more importantly, what role would representatives like Holly and Chisholm play at the state level to bring this to fruition?
Yeah, really appreciate the question. Really appreciate Dr. Gilbert, right, talking about this isn't, and you, Curtis, this isn't something new, right? This is something that HBCUs have been doing for a long period of time. And that's in part why I remain, despite some of the challenges that our kids are going through, really optimistic about what's possible for the future. Because indeed HBCUs are and have for a long period of time helped to transform educational experience for K-12 students, and whether that's through all the many different ways we've already talked about. But we at NACSA and some other folks have an idea that we think can be a pretty powerful one in thinking about what students and communities aspire to for the future. And that's a potential for an HBC or HBCUs to become charter school authorizers, right? Again, those entities that have the power to decide, right, if a new opportunity for a new school should open or not, overseeing their performance and hold them accountable, right, for strong outcomes. We think that that's a powerful idea to close the loop of self-determination. Right, all of the work that HBCUs are doing and will do in the future to transform K-12 education, why would we leave the most important decisions at the kind of the governance and accountability levels to people and entities who may not fully understand what we're trying to accomplish, right, for kids and communities? Now, bringing that vision to fruition is going to take some work. because many states that have HBCUs don't currently allow for higher education institutions to become authorizers. And so as I look at my esteemed panelists, especially representatives there, it's going to be important for them and others to create enabling legislation to make that happen. At the same time, it's really important for leadership in HBCUs to raise their hand and to say, this is something that I have an interest in exploring. It doesn't mean you necessarily have to do it as of yet, right? But at least say, this idea of trying to unlock the right kind of opportunities, closing the loop of self-determination among schools that we're engaged in, so we don't have to worry about some of the kind of local politics in school governance and authorization that can be challenging from time to time, and to say, I want to explore, this work. And let me be super clear, for folks listening. Being a great authorizer is hard. It is extraordinarily complex. It requires a ton of hard work, and it is absolutely not for the faint of heart. But isn't that like a description of who we are? Right? Haven't we always done the hard things that are needed for our kids? Right. So this idea of exploring and having representatives that can create enabling legislation, we think is a really transformative opportunity for the future of schools and kids. And so NACSA, we have created a set of exploratory processes and some policy options for policymakers and for HBCU leaders that we've been developing and refining over the past couple of decades. And so if you are an HBCU leader, listening to this that has an interest in exploring this opportunity, I personally would love to talk to you about that. And for my esteemed panelists as policymakers here and others that have a real interest in exploring and considering this, consider NACSA as a partner and to figure out how we might pull this particular lever that we believe can really transform opportunities for kids and families.
No, thank you so much. I mean, I think you're talking about really reinstating HBCUs at the top of the food chain as it relates to the education of Black and brown children, all children in this case, those who would attend the schools that they would authorize, and building on the history and the experience, not only historically in the past, but even right now. I do want to give Representative Holly and Chisholm an opportunity to respond. This question of what would it take for you and your colleagues in your respective state houses to give back the power to schools like Fisk, Lemoyne-Owen, Tennessee State, Morehouse, Spelman, Clark Atlanta, to open up schools, to authorize schools, to manage schools, to hold those schools accountable? What would it take for a representative like you to get to this point? What questions would you have and your colleagues you think you would have in order to get behind this idea of really giving HBCUs the power to control K-12 education in a way we have in the past, but don't right now?
Yeah, well, excuse me. I believe we are talking about a heavy lift, but it's definitely a challenge that we all can roll our sleeves up and get done. In the state of Tennessee, of course, HBCUs have had a lot of scrutiny. And a lot of that scrutiny is because of the scrutiny that our HBCUs have put on the state. There's been some underfunding issues that's been going on for years and years and years. And those HBCUs stepped up to the plate and said, hey, it's time to pay the piper. And the state of Tennessee ended up having to pay Tennessee State upwards of $250 million of back payments. So right now, whenever you tell a government entity that they're wrong, there's some backlash that comes with it. In anytime in this nation that Black people have stood up, there's been someone to try to bring them back down. But I believe that with a lot of working across the board or working across the aisle, because there are people who we have common interest with, and we have to work with those people who we do have common interest with. We have people in West Tennessee and East Tennessee and Middle Tennessee that can work together to make sure that our HBCUs are on the front lines of educating our Black students.
No, thank you. And again, this is not a sort of a one size fits all. It's a conversation in states. That's why I asked you about the questions you all may have, Representative Holly. As you're getting into this conversation about, again, Morehouse, Spelman, Fort Valley State, what questions would you have, and what opportunities you think this could be for HBCUs to really take back that control around who educates our children, and what the curriculum looks like, what the models are. That's the control you would get of HBCUs. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, absolutely. It actually even brings to mind how even I think currently Howard University is looking at the idea of having an endowed scholarship to make college tuition free, to make it available. What I like is not only just in terms of the idea itself, but I like that. I think that with respect to our legislature and the opportunities we have in the public school side or in the charter school side, is that it allows for us to decide as to how we find equity with the investments that we give. It means that we have. So the question I would ask would certainly like to see how are these institutions being able to apply a standard of equity that is palpable for the students who are themselves going to be the ones to inherit the profit of their investment. They have to. How do you define return of investment to those who are going to continue down that educational trajectory? And that means it needs to be, I would expect for it to be an answer that is going to be scalable. Show me some levels of measurements. I need to see benchmarks. If I'm a student there, if I'm a professor, I need to see what does it look like if we have heavily underfunded historically Black colleges and universities. If I'm going to give of my time and I'm going to be working outside of what's already in our set schedule, I'm going to, what other resources I'm going to add, and how do I look at that to be able to show that I have, and once I have these students who are coming through the program, they're able to get a strong, certifiable education, something that's going to be able to help them not only just be able to pay for their own lifestyles, but also to move ahead, make these industries be able to show that we are building the talent of tomorrow. I think that equity portion is really necessary. And I think to, my brother, Representative Chisholm, what he's saying about how our historically Black colleges are now saying we're not just going to rely on the funding coming to us because we were expecting that money to appear and it didn't, particularly for those 1890 land grant institutions that receiving money, were supposed to receive money after the passage of the Morrill Act, MORRILL, Morrill Act of 1862, which said that if you're not going to admit our students into the more traditional, predominantly white institutions, that you're going to have to fund our institutions separately. And what we've seen, certainly from the federal government via Secretary Tom Vilsack, I believe is it Miguel Cardona, which they literally have specified that for the federal funding that came to our 1890 land grant institutions, it was supposed to be matched to the state level, and it wasn't matched. And so we're seeing, in Tennessee, in Maryland, these states are having to come to grips with the fact that they haven't funded public education in the manner that it was supposed to be, that was already written to the statute. And so, to your question, Kurt, in terms of, I would love to see there being a discussion about how do we look at equity and how can our administration be able to make a demand and be able to show as to what they're able to get for the amount of money and make that palpable in a way that students can understand it, the way that the larger community on the outside that is helping to support that school for them to understand it. I will just add one small thing. I know I sit on our state's industry and labor committee, and having the relationship with our our labor institutions, AFL-CIO and RWDSW and so many that are on the grounds making sure that those who have specialized skills that they get the support they need in the labor market that may not recognize them fully for the skills that they provide. I know that labor institutions sometimes employ something called a community benefits agreement. And that community benefits agreement, what it basically proposes that if a company is going to be placed in their community, that there's going to be a requirement that maybe, give or take maybe 20 to 25% of the labor force must be made up of those individuals who live within a 5 square mile of that facility. And so I just use that as an example. We need to, when we look at making a demand for equity, we need to make sure that we're able to see how the money that is directed towards our education is specifically going to enable us to achieve a degree of fairness so that we can remain competitive. And I think that if we employ a scalable understanding of what fairness looks like in any funding setting, then there's no way that we can't be able to appreciate justice. But justice is going to have to spend, and it's going to have to actually look like justice.
Thank you so much. We're at time, but I definitely want to give Dr. Rausch and Dr. Gilbert the final word and give you at least 1 minute. To you, Dr. Rausch, what would this mean for HBCUs if they got the power to control what schools look like in their communities and serve the needs that we've established that parents want? And Dr. Gilbert, for you, I want to get you the final word. What would this mean for students? What would it mean for K-12 students? What would it mean for future HBCU students to have schools that were created and authorized by HBCUs? We'll go with you first, Dr. Rausch, and we'll have you get the final word, Dr. Gilbert. 1 minute, please.
The opportunity to fundamentally change kids' lives, who my grandmother said are melanin blessed like me. That's the opportunity that we're talking about. And the flip side of that opportunity is inaction, which means we'll continue to get the same results we're currently getting, which is not good enough for the brilliance that exists in our kids.
Thank you. Dr. Gilbert, final word.
Much like my brother, Dr. Rouse just stated, my question is, what if we do nothing? How is what we're doing now working for us? And if we have a positive or affirmative answer to that, I would like to know. But I don't think remaining with the status quo as things are right now is an option. Secondly, and connected, how do schools and systems as they are set up now, how does it free us? How does it free the next generation? If there's an opportunity to liberate this current and future generation through looking at different ways of being, doing, knowing, and acting as it relates to educating our students, let us aim for liberation.
Thank you. Sorry, go ahead. No.
I think I'll stop there because that
was a mic drop moment. I'm sorry. I'll pick the mic. That was a mic drop moment. We aim for liberation and revolution. And revolution, I think, in this space. I want to thank you all for joining. Before you all go, now you all been awoken to this opportunity. Those who are listening in, you're hearing about what's happening around our funding in our state, around the power, around education, what parents want. And I'm sure you want to learn more about this. Fortunately, the Reinventing America Schools Project has partnered with Kariga and NACSA on a policy paper on this very topic. In this paper, we highlight the ideas of HBCUs as public charter school authorizers, how it gets done, what it costs, but more importantly, what it benefits HBCUs, K-12 students, and students throughout the country. Register with PPI, go to our website or follow us on Twitter, and you'll get an alert when that paper is published. Myself and Kariga, and actually a sister of ours, Naomi Shelton from the Charter Collaborative, are going to sort of introduce this paper to you all and tell you how you can get this done. State representatives who want to bring us to their state, HBCU leaders who want to get involved, HBCU alumni who are saying, you know what, I want liberation, now I want to get involved. This is your opportunity. This is a historic moment for us to get involved. And right now is your time to support this work. It's about revolution. It's about liberation. And HBCUs stand for all of that. Thank you all so much for joining us. And we look forward to our next edition of the ROD webinar series. Tap in with us. Follow what's happening with NACSA. Follow what's happening at the Morehouse Center for Excellence in Education. Follow these two brothers, Representative Chisholm and Holly, and their states and what they're doing to create equity and opportunities for all. Thank you all so much. Have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.